Hey, welcome back. After a week of highs in the mid to high 90s, everybody's thinking about how to stay cool this summer. For most of the country, the answer to that question is air conditioning and high electricity bills. But if you were thinking about building an off grid cabin, especially with limited electricity, that may not be an option for you. In this video, we're going to talk about 5 architectural features that were used to manage heat long before air conditioning or even electricity were invented. Now, you're going to recognize all 5 of these features. And at the end of the video, you're going to look back and probably say, duh, I knew that. But I think what's interesting is that most people don't associate these features with heat management. And that's because since air conditioning was invented, most features of modern architecture are decorative. People like the way they look and they add them to their houses, but they do so in a non-functional way. I'll give you a quick example of what I mean by decorative and non-functional. Now, this has nothing to do with heat management, but if you look at modern houses, ever since storm windows and triple pane glass was invented, you hardly ever see functional shutters. Almost every window you look at has 2 washboards nailed up on either side, but they don't even put hinges on them anymore. It's completely decorative. They don't move. They offer no protection whatsoever to the window like shutters did, in centuries past. Now, the first 2 features I want to talk about are high ceilings and deep porches. And while I'm talking about these, I'm going to share some pictures that I found randomly on the internet of houses that were built in the 1700s and 1800s, so you could see what these features look like when they were completely functional. And then we're going to focus on how we incorporate this into shed-based cabins. So the job of a porch, obviously, is primarily to keep us out of the sun, to give us shade where it's much cooler, and then also to keep us out of, whatever inclement weather, snow, rain, etc. And it could be raining, the wind could be blowing from different directions. And also the sun obviously comes up on one side of us and goes down on the other. And, so in the middle of the day, it's right overhead, except in the winter when it's usually pretty low in the sky. So given that the sun and the wind and the rain move around, what I want you to notice about the porches in these pictures is not just the size of them, but the shape. So obviously, the deeper the porch, which is usually a function of budget, admittedly, the deeper the porch, the more area you have that's going to be in the shade and out of the rain. But also, you could have a relatively narrow porch that wraps around the building, on 2 or 3 or 4 sides. And then one side is always going to be in the lee of the wind, or on the shady side, the opposite side of the sun. And so you can shift your location to the coolest or most comfortable part. So, again, the first thing that we want to think about is the size and the shape of our porch. As far as high ceilings are concerned, that's pretty much a no-brainer. It doesn't require a lot of explanation. Heat rises, obviously, and the higher your ceiling, the farther that heat's going to be away from you and the more comfortable you're going to be. So now that you've seen what good looks like, let's take a look at not so good. If you were going to use a shed like this to build a cabin, you would basically be creating an oven in the Appalachias in the summer. The low ceilings are just going to make you miserable, and there's really no place to get out of the sun on that porch. Okay, so this example is probably a little bit more expensive, but you can see the roof is steeper and the porch is deeper. And that's going to give you both more volume inside and a higher ceiling, and the potential to have a small loft, as well as more protection from the elements outside. Now, this example is what the manufacturers call a barn style roof. And as far as I know, it's probably the optimal roof shape for a shed to cabin. And that's because you're going to have a high ceiling and you're going to have more volume, right? So there's more room for the air up there. Now, this example has an L-shaped porch. And if you're going to go with the pre-manufactured options, this is as close to a wraparound porch as you can get. Obviously, it's not wraparound; it's under the roof, but at least it gives you protection on two sides instead of just one. Of course, you don't have to go with the pre-manufactured options. You can always add a porch to your cabin at a later date on whichever side you want. But this style, L-shaped porch, is what I chose for my shed to cabin build. And I want to take a minute to just demonstrate how this porch shape really is functional. So in this quick video, I'm using a Kestrel to measure the wind speed. And if I stand behind the L, where the wind is blocked, you can see I'm measuring 0 miles per hour. But if I take a step 2 feet to the left here, you can see I'm measuring a couple miles per hour, a nice breeze. And then as I step back, you can see it goes back to 0, right? So again, let's just take a minute to think about the positioning of our porch. If the wind is blowing from the west to the east, then if your porch is on the south or the north, it's going to get the full breeze. It's going to get less breeze on the west and no breeze on the east. But at the same time, you've got to think about the positioning of the sun. Is it morning or evening or mid-afternoon? And in the winter, you're kind of wanting the opposite, right? You might want to sit in the sun for the warmth because it feels good, and you might not want a breeze. Now, this is my cabin interior, and you can see I've got the barn style roof, and the finished ceiling peaks at about 11 feet off the floor. It's pretty roomy up there, and you can also see our third feature, which is the ceiling fan. So believe it or not, there really were ceiling fans around in the 1700s. They just weren't electric. They were manual. And I believe the first electric ones came along in the late 1800s. But the point is, ceiling fans are really good at moving air around, and that circulation really helps heat management indoors. So what we want to talk about is not the obvious benefit, but it's to compare it to AC that we have today, right? And I'm not going to claim a ceiling fan works as good as AC. It's not going to lower the temperature as much, but the breeze still helps you feel more comfortable by simply evaporating your sweat and helping your body manage its own heat more efficiently. Now, what we want to talk about here is the electrical comparison to AC. So what you see in these numbers is that while mini splits, which are popular these days, are actually a good bit more efficient than air conditioners, ceiling fans are just in a completely different league when it comes to energy usage. Mine use 3.2 amps at 12 volts, which is like 41 watts. There's two of them, so that's 82 watts. I can run both of them all day long, 24 hours a day, and still use less than 2,000 watts. And, so with a traditional air conditioner at the same energy usage, I could run that for maybe an hour and 15 minutes a day. And I could run a mini split for maybe 2 hours a day. So, for the energy use, I would argue that the ceiling fan actually comes out ahead by a significant margin in terms of just making cabin life comfortable. Okay, feature number 4 is the cupola. That, if you're not familiar with it, is the funny looking steeple thing on top of the barn in the picture. They used to be pretty popular on larger buildings, and essentially they were just a way for you to control the hot air up at the top near the ceiling of the structure, exiting the building, right? So the heat rises, that air is going to flow up. If you trap it, it's got no place to go. If you put something up there with vents that you can open and close, then it's got a way to get out, and it'll cool the rest of your structure. So they're pretty functional, even though almost all the cupolas that you see on builds in the past, say 50, 60 years, are decorative and not functional. It's still a feature that's a great idea and works. Now, I've never actually seen one on a cabin, much less a shed based cabin build, but I was able to find a couple of pictures. I'm not sure if these are functional or decorative. I suspect decorative, but a few minutes with a Sawzall and it could be completely functional. So just one more feature for you to think about in terms of managing heat. Okay, feature number 5, the clay tile roof. Now, obviously, these are not as popular in Appalachia as they are in Central and South America, where it's much hotter. But if you're off grid and you're looking for, every heat management advantage you can get out of your architecture, it's worth thinking about because these things are popular where it's hot for a reason. They're really efficient at reflecting sunlight instead of absorbing it like a traditional asphalt shingle. And they also act like a heat shield on a wood stove, right? So they're curved and they have a space between them and the roof material, which allows airflow. Now, I wasn't able to find examples of shed cabin builds with clay tile shingles, but that doesn't mean you can't do it. However, I will offer one caveat, and that is these things are heavy, significantly heavier than a metal roof that you might find on most sheds like mine or asphalt shingles. So you want to pay attention to not only the weight of the tiles, but also your snow load, right? So if you ordered a cabin and you didn't customize it, then your framing might be 2x4s, 24 inches on center instead of like 2x6s, 18 inches on center. And so it might be significantly weaker than what you'd want. So definitely something you want to take a close look at. So that's our 5 features. Hope this has been helpful and good luck staying cool. Well, that's about all I have to say. Y'all come back now.